The night is still and cold, the front porch light flickering above the protagonist's neatly stacked packages. It's a familiar sight, but tonight, something is different. As the protagonist steps outside, the breath catches in their throat. There, on the edge of the porch, stands a figure, their neighbor. The person is leaning over one of the boxes, their hands moving with strange precision. They're carefully opening the package, peeling back the tape slowly, as if to avoid detection. The protagonist's heart races as anger surges. "What the hell are you doing?" they shout, their voice sharp with disbelief. The neighbor flinches, looking up with wide eyes like a caught animal. The figure stumbles backward, their hands raised defensively. I thought it was mine." The words are weak, unconvincing. The protagonist's gaze locks onto the opened box, its contents spilling out, a glimpse of a new set of headphones, unmistakably theirs. "You were stealing from me." The words cut through the air like a knife, and the neighbor's eyes dart around, their face a mix of guilt and panic. The neighbor takes a step back, fumbling as they try to close the box, but the damage is already done. The protagonist, standing frozen, tries to process the betrayal. This isn't a mistake. This is a violation. And in that moment, a trap has been set. Inside the house, the protagonist stands still, staring at the door through which the neighbor had just fled. Their pulse races as they replay the events over and over in their mind. It's not possible, right? They had known the neighbor for years. They'd shared small talk at barbecues, helped with odd jobs around the house. They had exchanged pleasantries, had even trusted this person. But trust is a fragile thing, the protagonist thinks, as the anger inside them slowly turns into something colder, more unsettling. The kitchen feels suffocating now, as though the walls are closing in. They walk towards the counter, grabbing their phone with shaking hands. Should they call the police? What good would it do? They stare at the screen, contemplating. Would they believe me? The fear of the unknown gnaws at them. They set the phone down, fingers still twitching with the impulse to do something, anything, to stop the overwhelming feeling of violation. Maybe it was a mistake, they reasoned, but deep down, the seed of doubt has been planted, and it will never leave. Days pass, but the weight of the betrayal lingers. The protagonist can't shake the image of their neighbor, crouched over the package, fingers digging into the cardboard, as though they had every right to pry into their private world. The neighbor's panicked eyes, the stammered excuse of, "I thought it was mine," still echo in the protagonist's mind. But the truth seems clearer now. It wasn't just an accidental mistake, it was deliberate. The fear begins to grow. If they were willing to steal something as small as a package, what else could they be capable of? The trust the protagonist once had is shattered, replaced with a gnawing suspicion that they can't ignore. Even in the most mundane moments, they are haunted by the thought, did they do this before? How long has this been going on? The protagonist tries to go about their day, but everything feels off, like they're constantly looking over their shoulder. At work, in the grocery store, even when they walk past their neighbor's house, it feels as though someone is always watching. Had they been watched this whole time? This question stirs unease, making their stomach churn. It becomes impossible to avoid confronting it head-on. The protagonist decides to confront the neighbor, face to face, and get the answers they deserve. It's the only way to rid themselves of this uncertainty. The decision is made. The protagonist cannot let this go. That night, after the workday ends, they stand in front of the neighbor's house, the sky already dark, and the air filled with a crisp chill. They take a deep breath, gathering every ounce of resolve. There's no turning back now. They can't afford to let this eat at them anymore. What's the worst that could happen? They think, trying to silence the rising anxiety. As the doorbell rings, they feel a wave of adrenaline rush through them, but they stand firm. The neighbor answers quickly and immediately. There's that awkward tension, the kind that lingers in the air after something unspeakable has occurred. The protagonist barely waits for an invitation before walking past the threshold, not sure what to expect, but certain that they need to know the truth. "We need to talk," they say, the words feeling cold, as if setting the stage for something unavoidable. The neighbor, looking nervous, steps back to allow them inside. The atmosphere is thick with unspoken words, but the protagonists won't back down. This conversation will happen one way or another. The neighbor, visibly uncomfortable, hesitates before speaking. "What is this about? Did you see something?" Their voice is shaky, betraying their attempt at appearing calm. The protagonist stands still, staring them down. There's no more pretense. "I saw you opening my package. Don't lie to me." The words hang heavy in the air. The neighbor's face blanches, and they take a step back, their body language defensive. They struggle to come up with an explanation, their words failing them. "I didn't mean to." The protagonist cuts them off. "It doesn't matter what you meant. You violated my trust. You invaded my privacy." The neighbor remains silent, eyes shifting nervously, but the protagonist's gaze doesn't waver. "Tell me the truth. What were you looking for?" The silence stretches on, and it feels as though the weight of the confrontation is suffocating both of them. The neighbor, after what seems like an eternity, finally speaks, their voice barely a whisper. I thought it was something valuable. I didn't know it was yours. I'm sorry." The apology feels hollow, the damage done too deep for words to fix. But the truth is out now, and nothing will ever be the same. The days drag on, and the tension only intensifies. The protagonist can't focus at work, can't even walk through their house without their mind racing back to that night on the porch. Every knock at the door, every ring of the phone makes their stomach drop. The thought gnaws at them. What if there's more to this? The neighbor had denied it, claiming it was a one-time mistake, a lapse in judgment. But how can the protagonist trust that? How many times had the neighbor been watching, waiting? The house feels more like a prison, every corner haunted by the memory of the betrayal. Every glance out the window seems to catch a flicker of movement in the neighbor's house, making the protagonist's blood run cold. What if they'd been under surveillance for longer than they realize? They hadn't felt it before, but now, with this knowledge weighing on them, every feeling of insecurity makes sense. The seed of doubt has been planted, and now it's growing. What else could they have been watching? They decide to take matters into their own hands. They need to know, need to confront the truth. But how? How far would they need to go to find out what the neighbor is hiding? The question lingers in the air like smoke, and it begins to choke them. The protagonist waits until evening, staring at the neighbor's house from their window. The street is quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of traffic and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Every moment feels like an eternity. Should I go knock on the door again? The thought repeats in their head, but it's different this time. The first confrontation felt like an accident, like the neighbor had stumbled over a line they didn't mean to cross. But now, the protagonist can't shake the feeling that something's off. The unease has festered into a sense of foreboding. The neighbor's actions have become a dark shadow that looms over their every move. The protagonist can't trust them anymore. There's a deep-rooted suspicion that continues to grow with each passing hour. They watch the neighbor's house like a hawk, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, that will confirm their fears. There's no rational explanation for this obsession, but the need to uncover the truth is overpowering. Finally, unable to stand the silence, the protagonist grabs their jacket and heads out the door, their mind set. The only way to resolve this feeling is to confront it head-on. The confrontation is inevitable. The protagonist can't let this uncertainty linger any longer. They make their way across the street, heart pounding in their chest with every step. As they approach the front door, their mind races with possible outcomes. What will they find out? What if the neighbor is hiding more than they ever expected? The doorbell rings, and the protagonist's breath catches in their throat. The seconds drag on as they wait for the door to open. When it finally does, the neighbor stands there, visibly startled. There's a moment of awkward silence, where the tension between them feels suffocating. The neighbor's eyes flicker nervously, avoiding eye contact. The protagonist doesn't waste time with pleasantries. They jump straight to the point. "We need to talk," they say, their voice firm, determined. The neighbor steps back, reluctantly letting them inside. The door creaks as it closes behind them, trapping them both in the quiet, tense space of the living room. The air is thick with the weight of unsaid things. The protagonist stands still for a moment, collecting their thoughts before speaking. "I need you to tell me the truth. Why were you opening my packages?" The neighbor stammers, caught off guard, but the protagonist stands unwavering, not backing down. The neighbor hesitates, their hands trembling slightly as they try to form an explanation. "I didn't mean to. It was just, I thought it was something valuable," the neighbor mumbles, their voice shaky and filled with regret. But the protagonist isn't convinced. "It doesn't matter what you thought," they say coldly. "You crossed a line. You violated my trust." The neighbor's face pales, and they avert their gaze, unable to meet the protagonist's eyes. The words sting. They had trusted this person, shared space with them, and now it's clear that all of that was built on a lie. The truth has been laid bare, and there's no undoing it. The protagonist feels the sharpness of the betrayal settle deep within them. There's a quiet for a moment, both of them standing in the living room, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. "Why did you do it?" the protagonist presses, needing to understand, needing closure. The neighbor's hands ring together, their bodies shaking slightly as they finally speak, barely above a whisper. "I thought I could get away with it. I didn't think you'd notice." The protagonist's jaw tightens. "Well, you were wrong." The air between them is thick with tension, but the protagonist knows this conversation can't continue forever. The trust is gone, and so is any hope of salvaging the relationship. "I'm done here," the protagonist finally says, their voice cold, devoid of any sympathy. The neighbor looks up, desperation flickering in their eyes. "Please, don't tell anyone. I'll make it right," they beg, their voice cracking with emotion. But the protagonist shakes their head. "You've already crossed the line. There's nothing you can do now." The words hit like a final nail in the coffin. The neighbor stands there motionless as the protagonist turns and walks toward the door. The weight of the decision is heavy, but the protagonist doesn't look back. The door clicks shut behind them with a soft finality, sealing the chapter of betrayal. But even as they step out into the night, the protagonist can't shake the feeling that this encounter has changed them forever. The days after the confrontation are tense and strange. The protagonist can't help but replay the neighbor's final words in their head, the desperate plea for forgiveness that hung in the air. It was clear. There was no going back. The damage was done, and the trust had been shattered. But there's a part of the protagonist that can't let it go. Did they really mean it? Did they feel remorse? Or was it just a ploy to avoid consequences? The weight of the unanswered question gnaws at them, growing heavier with each passing hour. The neighbor has been keeping their distance since that night. Not even a glance or a word exchanged. The protagonist wonders if they truly understand the gravity of what happened. It's hard to trust someone who has betrayed you so blatantly. But the silence is eating away at the protagonist. It's unnatural, uncomfortable. The protagonist keeps coming back to one simple truth. The neighbor had been caught red-handed. But what if there's more to this story? What if they weren't just acting on impulse but were driven by something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface? The need to understand is overwhelming. They decide they have to go back, have to confront the neighbor once more, even if it means revisiting the painful memory. The truth is elusive, and the protagonist feels they're the only one who can pull it into the light. It's evening again, and the protagonist stands at the edge of the neighbor's front yard. The air is thick with unease as the decision to return feels heavier than ever. There's no escaping this moment. They need closure. The neighbor's house is quiet, almost too quiet. The windows are dark, no signs of life or movement. The protagonist's hand hovers over the doorbell for a moment, the sound of their heartbeat in their ears. Finally, they ring it, the sound echoing in the stillness. The door creaks open slowly, and the neighbor stands there, looking more worn than before. There's a slight tremble in their eyes, the weight of guilt and regret more visible than before. The tension is thick as the protagonist steps inside, not waiting for an invitation this time. The silence is heavy between them as they sit in the same room as the night of the confrontation. The neighbor finally speaks, their voice quiet. "What do you want from me?" they ask, their eyes not meeting the protagonist's. The question stings, but the protagonist is resolute. "I want the truth," they reply. The neighbor swallows hard, and for a moment there's hesitation. "I thought I could get away with it," they admit, their voice barely a whisper. "But it was wrong. I know it now." The words hang in the air, but they feel incomplete. The protagonist's stomach churns with unease. "You're telling me it was a mistake? That's all it was?" The words feel bitter on their tongue. The neighbor's eyes shift, their voice cracking as they attempt to explain. "It wasn't like that. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could just take something and never get caught. But I was wrong." The words don't feel like enough, though. They don't erase the violation, the breach of trust that had occurred. The protagonist can't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal, like something inside them is broken and cannot be repaired. The neighbor's eyes remain lowered, ashamed, but the protagonist can't shake the feeling that the neighbor is still hiding something. The lies run deeper than the package. "There's more to this," the protagonist says quietly, their voice strained. The neighbor freezes. There's a long pause before the truth begins to unravel. "I was watching you," the neighbor admits, their voice barely audible. "I wasn't just taking packages. I was watching everything. The way you lived, the way you moved. I thought I could understand you." The confession cuts through the air like a blade. The words hit the protagonist like a slap, the full weight of the neighbor's actions finally sinking in. "You were watching me?" The protagonist's voice cracks with disbelief. The neighbor nods slowly, their hands wringing together in a desperate attempt to calm their shaking. "I didn't know how to stop," they say quietly, the guilt radiating from them. "I thought I was in control, but I wasn't. I couldn't help myself. It wasn't just the packages, it was everything. Your routine, the way you went about your day." The neighbor's words trail off, and for the first time they meet the protagonist's gaze, the depth of shame in their eyes impossible to ignore. The silence stretches between them, suffocating and uncomfortable. The protagonist doesn't know how to respond. How could they have known? How could they have felt safe with someone who'd been watching them from the shadows for so long? The question burns, but the answer remains elusive. The truth is out now, but it only brings more pain, more confusion. The betrayal runs deeper than the protagonist ever imagined. The confession has been made, but it leaves more questions than answers. The protagonist feels betrayed, not just by the neighbor's actions, but by their own naivety. How could they have trusted them? How could they have shared the smallest pieces of their life with someone who had been silently observing from the shadows? The anger begins to well up inside the protagonist, but it's tempered by a profound sadness. "I can't do this," they say, their voice quiet but firm. "I can't keep living in this uncertainty, in this lie." The neighbor's eyes widen in desperation. "Please don't leave like this. I'll make it right. I'll do anything," they plead. But the protagonist shakes their head. "You can't undo what's been done," they reply, the finality in their voice leaving no room for negotiation. The neighbor's face crumples, the weight of their actions finally sinking in. "I'm sorry," they whisper, but the apology feels hollow. The protagonist turns and walks toward the door, leaving the neighbor standing alone, the silence swallowing the space between them. The protagonist stands in their driveway, watching the police car fade into the night. The betrayal has been exposed, but instead of relief, an emptiness lingers. Every corner of the house feels colder now. The protagonist steps inside, their heart heavy with the weight of decisions made. The house is still, the silence louder than ever. The sense of justice they expected never comes. Instead, they're left with an uncomfortable void, the consequences of betrayal now irreversible. Days pass, and the protagonist can't shake the feeling of emptiness. The neighbor is gone, arrested, but the silence in the house is deafening. The protagonist can't help but question, if the neighbor's actions were truly a one-time mistake. The house feels cold, empty. There's no closure, only unanswered questions. Phone rings. It's the neighbor's family, apologizing. The protagonist doesn't know how to respond. The apology feels empty, and the question remains, what now? The phone call from the neighbor's family lingers in the protagonist's mind. The apology feels rehearsed, hollow. The protagonist wonders if they truly understand the depth of the betrayal. He was a good boy, the neighbor's mother says, but the words don't ease the pain. The protagonist ends the call, the silence in the house now oppressive. There is no forgiveness here, only a deeper sense of loss. The truth has been revealed, but it only raises more questions. Days blend together as the protagonist struggles with the lingering unease. The house feels like a prison, a constant reminder of the betrayal. The phone rings again, but this time, it's not the family, it's the protagonist calling their lawyer. They need closure. The neighbor's actions have destroyed their sense of security, and they can't move on until they know what happens next. The protagonist prepares to take the next step. The protagonist meets with the lawyer, explaining everything. The lawyer listens carefully, offering reassurance that legal action is the right choice, though it will take time. The protagonist nods, their resolve strengthening. The next steps are clear, but they feel no relief. As they leave the lawyer's office, the weight of the decision still hangs over them. But now, they have a plan. It's not closure, but it's something. The first step toward moving on. The following weeks pass in a blur. The protagonist's mind is consumed with the legal proceedings. The neighbor's arrest and the subsequent investigation have taken over their thoughts, but they can't help but feel like they're losing themselves in the process. Every conversation, every decision feels detached, like they're going through the motions. The house remains cold and lifeless, a constant reminder of the betrayal. They still can't shake the feeling of being watched, of the neighbor's presence lingering like a shadow in every room. One evening, they sit at the kitchen table, going over paperwork related to the case. As they stare at the documents, the weight of it all crashes down on them. The truth may have come to light, but it hasn't brought the relief they hoped for. Instead, it has left a void, an emptiness that they don't know how to fill. They wonder if they will ever feel whole again. The protagonist starts to question the entire ordeal. Was this the right path? Did they make the right choice by involving the authorities? The sense of finality in the neighbor's arrest lingers, but so does the uncertainty. They hadn't expected to feel empty, but they do. Every day they find themselves looking over their shoulder, haunted by the memory of the neighbor's actions. They still can't escape the feeling of being violated, even with the law on their side. One night, the protagonist receives a letter from the neighbor, a handwritten apology. It's heartfelt, desperate, but it stirs something else inside them. A part of them wants to believe the sincerity in the words, but another part recoils at the thought of extending forgiveness. What does forgiveness even look like now? Can they forgive what's been done? The question remains unanswered, and the protagonist finds themselves drowning in indecision. The past weeks have forced them to confront not just the betrayal, but their own vulnerabilities. The letter from the neighbor lingers on the protagonist's mind, a constant reminder of everything that's happened. They can't shake the feeling of having been deceived for so long. How much of their life had been a lie? How much of their trust had been given away without question? The apology feels like a band-aid on a wound too deep to heal. The protagonist wonders if they'll ever be able to trust again, even with the neighbor gone. Thought of forgiving the neighbor, of moving past this, feels impossible. There's too much anger, too much pain. The protagonist spends the next few days in a fog, not sure how to proceed. They go through the motions of daily life, but remain detached, unable to fully engage. The weight of betrayal still presses down on them, and they can't see a way forward. As they lay awake at night, the thought creeps in again. What now? A breakthrough comes unexpectedly. The protagonist finds themselves sitting in a park one afternoon watching the world go by. The sun is setting, casting warm hues across the sky. They realize for the first time in weeks that they can breathe again. The weight that had been crushing them begins to lift. The neighbor's betrayal is still a scar, but the protagonist knows now that they can move forward. They don't need the neighbor's forgiveness, nor do they need to hold on to the anger. The past cannot be changed, but they can choose how to respond to it. The protagonist understands now that healing doesn't come from revenge or closure, it comes from letting go. It's a slow, painful process, but it's the first step toward freedom. The protagonist stands up, feeling lighter. They take a deep breath, ready to leave the past behind. The protagonist slowly returns to their life, no longer consumed by the anger or the hurt. The house doesn't feel like a prison anymore. It feels like a home again, even if it's still haunted by the past. There's still work to be done, still healing to be had, but the protagonist knows they're on the right path. They've learned that while betrayal can break trust, it doesn't have to break them. The protagonist walks forward with a new sense of strength, unburdened by the past. The journey isn't over, but they are finally ready to move on. The weight has lifted, and with it, a new sense of hope fills the space where anger once lived. Weeks pass, and the house begins to feel like home again. The protagonist feels the weight of anger lift, replaced by a quiet acceptance. The betrayal still lingers, but now they choose to move forward. Healing isn't about forgetting, it's about living with it. The phone rings and it's the neighbor's family again. They apologize, saying the neighbor is seeking help. The protagonist listens, but they know it doesn't change what happened. "I've already moved on," they say, ending the call. The past is no longer their burden. The idea of forgiveness lingers. The protagonist questions if they can truly forgive the neighbor. The more they reflect, the more they realize forgiveness is a process, not an event. Forgiveness isn't for them, it's for me, they think, ready to start healing. The protagonist wakes up with a new sense of resolve. They step outside into the morning air, ready to begin forgiving. The journey will be long, but today marks the first step. Today I begin to forgive. The weight of the past starts to lift. The protagonist reconnects with life, finding joy in simple moments. They pass the neighbor's old house, but instead of anger, there's peace. They smile, feeling free from the past. The road ahead is uncertain, but they're ready to face it with a new sense of peace. Life continues, and the protagonist slowly finds their rhythm again. The pain of betrayal is still there, but it no longer controls them. They are rebuilding, learning to trust again, and finding new ways to embrace the world around them. It's not about forgetting, it's about growing. The protagonist spends time with old friends, reconnecting and rebuilding bonds that had been affected by the chaos. They laugh, share stories, and feel the warmth of human connection again. Trust may take time, but it can be rebuilt, they think, appreciating these moments. The neighbor's actions are no longer a shadow in the protagonist's life. They've come to realize that while the betrayal hurt, it didn't define them. The protagonist has found strength in themselves and the people around them. They are no longer weighed down by the past. A quiet evening. The protagonist sits alone, reflecting on the journey. They've learned that healing isn't linear, and that growth comes with both pain and joy. They're no longer afraid of the future, knowing they can face whatever comes next. I'm ready for what's ahead. The final chapter of this journey feels like a quiet release. The protagonist has learned to forgive, to let go, and to embrace the future. They close their eyes, grateful for the lessons learned, knowing that their story is still being written. This is just the beginning.